The sun hung high over the city square, casting sharp shadows across the sea of people gathered beneath it. Banners waved, voices rose, and chants echoed off surrounding buildings. The protest was peaceful. At least it had started that way. People of all ages and races stood united, demanding justice and police accountability. Signs read, "Enough is enough, justice for all, and we will not be silenced." Among the crowd stood Harold Whitaker, 73 years old, thin, slightly stooped, but proud. His wrinkled hands gripped a wooden cane in his right hand, while his left clutched a simple cardboard sign that read, "Dignity is a right, not a privilege." Harold had lived through many chapters of injustice. Born in the days of segregation, he'd seen his community struggle and rise. Now, even as his bones ached and his legs wobbled, he felt a duty to stand with the younger generation. His daughter Emily had begged him to stay home, afraid for his safety, but Harold had insisted. "This isn't just their fight," he told her gently that morning. "It's ours. It always has been." As the chants grew louder, the atmosphere shifted. The police line advanced, mounted officers forming a dark wall of muscle and steel. Their horses, tall and powerful, stomped the pavement, snorting through their flared nostrils. The officers' faces were unreadable beneath their visors. The lead officer, Brian Keller, scanned the crowd from atop his massive black stallion. His voice boomed through a bullhorn. "Disperse immediately or face arrest. This is your final warning." Many protesters began retreating slowly, but the square was congested. Movement was difficult. Some people tried to calm others down, urging them to remain peaceful. Harold, hearing impaired in one ear, tried to shuffle backward as the horses came closer, but the crowd hemmed him in. He glanced around, anxiety rising in his chest. "Sir, move back," Officer Keller shouted directly at him. Harold raised his hand, his voice thin but steady. "I'm trying, officer, please." But Keller wasn't listening. In a flash, he leaned down from his saddle and grabbed Harold's jacket collar with a gloved hand. "Resisting an officer is a crime," Keller barked. The grip tightened. Harold's cane slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the asphalt. The horse snorted and shifted as Keller yanked Harold forward violently. The old man stumbled, unable to keep his footing, and was pulled beneath the towering animal. "Stop! What are you doing? He's elderly!" a woman nearby screamed, raising her. Phone to record, but Keller was relentless. The horse suddenly lurched forward, and Harold, caught by the officer's firm grasp, was dragged several feet across the unforgiving pavement. His glasses flew off, shattering. His face scraped along the ground, leaving a trail of bright red blood. Cries of horror rippled through the crowd. "Stop dragging him," another man shouted, running forward before being restrained by other officers. Harold's cries of pain were faint but haunting. His frail frame bounced along the rough asphalt like a rag doll. The unforgiving ground tore into his palms, knees, and face. Finally, another officer approached and shouted at Keller. "That's enough, Brian. Let him go." With a jerk, Keller released Harold, who crumpled to the ground, his breathing shallow and labored. The horse reared slightly, its front hooves thudding back onto the ground, dangerously close to Harold's head. Medics rushed in as the crowd's fury boiled. Some people sobbed, others screamed at the officers. Cell phones captured every moment. Sirens wailed in the distance as backup and ambulances arrived. Lying on the stretcher, Harold barely managed to whisper, his voice rasping through cracked lips. Why did he do that? Nobody could answer. But in that single moment, a spark had been lit, one that would ignite a fire across the nation. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in Harold's hospital room. Fluorescent lights bathed his pale, bruised face in a harsh glow. His head was wrapped in white bandages, and deep purple bruises colored his ribs and arms. A sling supported his left arm, fractured from the brutal dragging. Every breath he took was shallow and painful. Beside him sat Emily, his daughter, her hands trembling as she gently wiped the sweat from his forehead. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I'm here, Dad," she whispered softly. "You're safe now." Harold slowly opened his eyes, wincing as the light stung them. His voice was barely audible. "Emily, I tried to move." "I know, Daddy, I know." She squeezed his hand gently. "Everyone saw what happened. It's all over the news." Outside the hospital, A growing crowd of reporters, activists, and supporters had gathered. Camera crews lined the sidewalks, broadcasting updates around the clock. Social media platforms were ablaze with outrage. The video of Harold being dragged by the mounted officer had gone viral within hours, sparking national debates on police brutality and the excessive use of force. On television, Officer Keller stood before a podium surrounded by police union representatives. His calm, practiced voice contrasted sharply with the brutality seen in the video. In a chaotic and dangerous situation, decisions must be made in real time, Keller stated. The individual was non-compliant and presented a potential threat to the safety of my horse and the public. I regret the injuries sustained but stand by my actions. Emily clenched her fists as she watched the press conference from the hospital room. The audacity of Keller's lies made her blood boil. "He's blaming you, Dad," she said through gritted teeth. "He's pretending you were some kind of threat." Harold closed his eyes, sighing heavily. "That's how they do it, sweetheart. They twist things." "No," Emily said firmly, standing up. "Not this time, not with everyone watching." She wasn't alone. Across the country, outrage grew. Hashtags like "Tree Justice for Harold" and "My Dragged by the Police" flooded social media. Prominent figures, activists, and celebrities spoke out, condemning the officer's actions and demanding accountability. Protests reignited in major cities. People held signs with Harold's photo, standing in solidarity with the elderly man who had become an unwilling symbol of systemic abuse. Meanwhile, threats also emerged. Emily received anonymous calls warning her to stay quiet. Online trolls attacked Harold's character, digging into his past, trying to smear him as an agitator. The police union released statements accusing the media of bias and urged the public to wait for all the facts. The pressure weighed heavily on Harold's frail shoulders. One evening, as Emily helped him sit up, he spoke, his voice cracking. "Maybe I should just let it go, Emily. I'm old, tired. I don't want you getting hurt because of me." Tears finally spilled down Emily's cheeks. "No, Daddy. You stood up for what was right, and they tried to silence you. We're not going to let them win." At that moment, a knock came at the hospital room door. A woman in her early 40s entered, carrying a briefcase. Her expression was both kind and determined. "Mr. Whitaker, my name is Elena Morales. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've been following your case very closely. I believe we have grounds for a lawsuit against the department." Harold looked at her wearily. "You think we can win?" Elena smiled gently. "With your courage and the truth on our side, we have a fighting chance. And sometimes, that's all justice needs." Emily reached out and gripped Elena's hand. "We want to fight." Outside, the world watched. What had started as one man's peaceful stand was quickly turning into a national reckoning. The battle for justice was only beginning. Elena Morales sat across from Harold and Emily in her small but well-kept law office. Stacks of legal briefs and case files surrounded them, but her attention was fully on Harold. His face was still marked by the brutal events of that day, healing, but visibly scarred. "I won't lie to you," Elena began gently. "This case won't be easy. The police union is already preparing to protect Officer Keller. They'll argue that you were non-compliant and that Keller acted within department policy." Harold's lips tightened. "Policy?" His voice was low, but his frustration was clear. "Dragging a 73-year-old man across concrete is policy now." Eleanor nodded, understanding his anger. "They'll say almost anything to justify it. But we have the video, multiple witnesses, and your medical records. That gives us power." Emily leaned forward, gripping her father's hand. "We're not backing down," Elena smiled softly. "Good. Because this isn't just about you, Mr. Whitaker. This is about every person who's been mistreated and ignored because no one thought they'd fight back." Word of the lawsuit spread quickly. News outlets covered it daily. Support poured in from activists, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens. Protesters filled city squares again, chanting, "Justice for Harold." But with the support came the backlash. Late one night, Emily received another threatening phone call. "Drop the lawsuit, or you'll regret it." Her hands shook as she hung up, but instead of fear, a steely determination filled her chest. The intimidation only fueled her resolve. Meanwhile, Officer Keller remained defiant. In interviews, he repeated the same rehearsed lines. "It was a high-pressure situation. I feared for my safety and my horse. My actions were consistent with my training." The police union stood firmly behind him, portraying him as a dedicated officer caught in a difficult moment. The city filed motion after motion to dismiss the lawsuit. But Elena was relentless. Every attempt to bury the case only made her fight harder. Then a breakthrough came. A young man named Marcus Jenkins, who had attended the protest that day, reached out to Elena. He had flown a drone above the protest and captured high-resolution footage from a different angle, footage that had not been made public yet. Sitting in Elena's office, Marcus played the video. There it was, crystal clear. Harold, standing quietly, trying to back away. Officer Keller reaching down aggressively, grabbing him without provocation, the horse lurching forward, Harold being dragged like a lifeless object. Emily gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Tears welled in Harold's eyes as he watched himself, vulnerable and powerless. "This changes everything," Elena whispered. The footage was released to the public. Within hours, it spread across the internet like wildfire. News anchors dissected every frame. Legal analysts debated Keller's actions, and public pressure mounted on city officials. More people joined the protests. Celebrities tweeted their support. National civil rights leaders called for Keller's suspension and an independent investigation. The mayor, facing mounting criticism, finally broke his silence. "We cannot ignore what the footage shows. There must be accountability." Keller was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the trial. His calm demeanor in interviews was replaced by visible tension. The police union doubled down, accusing the media of creating a false narrative and warning that officers were under attack. But the tide had turned. Elena worked tirelessly to prepare for trial. Witnesses were lined up. Medical experts would testify about Harold's injuries. Use of force experts would challenge Keller's actions. One evening, as the legal team reviewed documents, Elena looked at Harold. "Are you ready for what's ahead?" she asked. Harold's voice was steady. "I've lived through worse. They tried to drag me to silence that day. They failed. The courtroom doors were waiting. So was justice." The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse creaked open as Harold Whitaker stepped inside. Emily walked beside him, gently supporting her father's arm. The weight of the moment was written across both of their faces. Camera flashes burst like fireworks as reporters shouted questions, but neither of them spoke. Inside, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Activists, reporters, and curious onlookers lined every bench. The world was watching. Elena Morales stood at the plaintiff's table, her expression calm but alert. She glanced over at Harold and gave him a small nod of reassurance. Across the aisle sat Officer Keller, his face unreadable. His defense team, backed by the police union's top attorneys, exuded confidence. As the trial began, the judge addressed the jury. "You are here to decide whether Officer Brian Keller used excessive force against Mr. Harold Whitaker on the day in question. This case is about the rule of law and whether it applies equally to all." Elena rose and began her opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a case about a dangerous suspect. This is not a case about a riot or an aggressive protester. This is about a 73-year-old man who was violently dragged by a police officer while peacefully exercising his constitutional right to protest." She paused, letting her words settle. "We will show you video evidence, medical records, and expert testimony that prove beyond doubt that Officer Keller used unnecessary and brutal force against a defenseless man." The defense countered, painting a different picture. In the chaos of that day, Officer Keller had to make split-second decisions. The crowd was surging. His horse was threatened. Mr. Whitaker failed to comply with lawful orders. This was an unfortunate accident, not misconduct. The jury watched closely as the first piece of evidence was presented, the viral video from the protest. The familiar gut-wrenching footage played on the large screen, Keller grabbing Harold, the horse jerking forward, Harold's body scraping across the pavement. Some jurors looked away, visibly disturbed. Then came Marcus Jenkins. A drone footage, the angle no one could dispute. The camera clearly showed Harold attempting to move backward, not resisting, when Keller lunged for him. A deep silence filled the room when the video ended. Elena called the medical examiner next. The doctor detailed Harold's injuries. Broken ribs, a fractured arm, head trauma, severe abrasions. These injuries, the doctor testified, are consistent with being dragged forcefully across a rough surface. They are not consistent with a simple fall or minor scuffle. The courtroom stiffened when Harold himself took the stand. His voice was weak but unwavering. I wasn't trying to resist. I was trying to move back. But there were people everywhere. I couldn't move fast. I wasn't a threat to anyone. Eleanor gently asked, "Mr. Whitaker, what were you feeling in that moment?" Harold swallowed hard. Fear, helplessness, shame, that I was being treated like a criminal when all I wanted was to stand for what's right. When Officer Keller took the stand, his calm mask began to slip under Elena's relentless cross-examination. "You stated Mr. Whitaker was non-compliant. At what point did a 73-year-old man with a cane present a danger to you or your horse?" "I couldn't predict his intentions," Keller replied uneasily. "In a chaotic environment, you have to assume the worst." Elena's voice sharpened. "The worst? Or did you assume weakness meant you could act without consequence?" Keller's silence was deafening. The trial stretched over several days. Witnesses testified. Experts analyzed policy and training. But the heart of the case remained simple: a powerful officer abusing a powerless man. As closing arguments concluded, Elena stood before the jury one final time. "This isn't just about Harold Whitaker. This is about whether we allow those sworn to protect us to harm the most vulnerable and hide behind a badge. Justice demands accountability." The jury retired to deliberate. Outside, a crowd gathered, holding candles and signs. The whole nation waited. The verdict was near. The jury had been out for nearly 3 days. Every hour felt like an eternity. Harold sat quietly in the courtroom, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Emily sat beside him, gripping his hand, her thumb gently rubbing the back of his weathered knuckles. The weight of the entire journey pressed down on them, the pain, the fear, the threats, the public attention. It had all led to this moment. The doors finally opened. The jury filed in, their expressions solemn but unreadable. The judge addressed the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman stood and cleared his throat. "We have, Your Honor." Every breath in the room seemed to stop. In the matter of Whitaker versus Officer Keller and the City Police Department, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Harold Whitaker. Gasps filled the air, followed by a quiet wave of relieved sighs. Emily pressed her hands to her mouth as tears poured freely. Harold simply closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling, as though he were finally able to breathe after months of suffocating. The foreman continued. "We award compensatory and punitive damages to Mr. Whitaker for the harm suffered. Additionally, we recommend formal disciplinary action against Officer Keller." The judge banged the gavel. "The court thanks the jury for their service." Reporters rushed to the steps outside as the crowd outside the courthouse erupted in cheers. Signs waved high, some reading "Justice for Harold," others simply bearing his face, now a national symbol of dignity standing against brutality. As the legal team, Harold and Emily, walked out of the building, microphones and cameras swarmed them. Elena Morales stood firm beside her clients. "Today," she said into the microphones, "the jury affirmed what millions of people already knew. No one is above the law, not even those who wear a badge. Mr. Whitaker stood for what was right, and because of his courage, change is now possible." Harold, tired but steady, stepped forward. Reporters leaned in, eager for his words. "I didn't ask to be here," he began softly. "I only went to that protest to stand with others for what I believe in. I never expected to be dragged, literally, and humiliated. But what happened to me happens to many others who never get their day in court." He paused, his voice trembling. "Slightly. I wasn't strong enough to fight this alone, but my daughter, my lawyer, and the people who stood with me, they gave me strength. This fight was never just about me. It's about dignity. And today, dignity won." As the applause rang out, Keller and his legal team quietly slipped away. Later that evening, the police department announced that Keller would be dismissed and stripped of his badge. An internal review of the department's use-of-force policies was launched, promising long-overdue reforms. In the weeks that followed, Harold's case became a catalyst for broader conversations about police accountability. Lawmakers cited his case when proposing new legislation to protect citizens from abuse of power. Community organizations held forums to promote better relationships between law enforcement and the public. One morning, as the media frenzy slowly faded and life tried to return to normal, Emily and Harold sat on a park bench beneath a large oak tree. "Are you proud, Daddy?" Emily asked softly, resting her head on his shoulder. Harold smiled faintly, staring out at the children playing nearby. "I'm at peace," he answered. "That's enough." A soft breeze rustled the leaves above them as the sun bathed the park in golden light. For Harold Whitaker, justice had not erased the pain, but it had restored his dignity. And sometimes that was the most powerful victory of all.